When we think of ancient warfare, it's easy to picture swords, shields, and sheer strength deciding the outcome. Yet the siege of Syracuse tells a different story, one that feels surprisingly modern. This was not just a contest of power, but of technology. Both sides believed their machines would secure victory. However, the battle revealed a timeless truth. Advanced weapons are useless without smart strategy. Roman general Marcellus learned this lesson the hard way. When his war machines failed to compete with those of his opponents, he was forced to rethink his entire approach, a challenge that echoes throughout modern military history. Opposing him were the Greeks, armed with an extraordinary advantage, a man named Archimedes. Known to most as the genius of geometry, the thinker who studied circles, levers, and famously shouted, "Eureka!" In his bath, Archimedes became much more than a scholar during the siege. He transformed the city's defenses into mechanical fortresses, turning Syracuse's walls into powerful weapons capable of resisting Rome itself, including his legendary invention, the Claw of Archimedes. Hello and welcome to Great History, your daily source of historical insight, bringing you 30 minutes of captivating history every day. If you'd like to help shape what we explore next, be sure to subscribe and help us reach 50,000 subscribers. The story of Archimedes. Iron Hand begins with the uncertain fate of Syracuse during the Second Punic War. Between 218 and 201 BC, Rome and Carthage were locked in a fierce struggle for dominance over the western Mediterranean. Syracuse, situated on the island of Sicily, found itself caught between the two superpowers. For decades, the city had avoided conflict under King Hero Setu, a loyal ally of Rome for over 50 years. But after his death in 215 BC, the fragile peace began to collapse. His grandson, Hieronymus, only 15 years old, ascended the throne and quickly sided with Hannibal and the Carthaginians, encouraged by Hannibal's early victories. Not everyone in Syracuse supported that decision. Within a year, Hieronymus was assassinated, plunging the city into political turmoil. Rival factions, one loyal to Rome, the other to Carthage, fought bitterly for control. In the end, the pro-Carthaginian faction prevailed, setting Syracuse on a collision course with Rome. Rome responded in 213 BC by dispatching Marcus Claudius Marcellus, one of its consuls, to handle the situation. Marcellus first attempted diplomacy, but when talks failed, he launched a full-scale assault from two directions. His colleague Ius Claudius Pulcher advanced toward the northern land walls, while Marcellus commanded a fleet of Quincaraemes to attack the sea walls of the Acradina district. Standing on the coast of Syracuse today, it's difficult to picture the immense fortifications the city once possessed. The seaward walls have long vanished, though some inland sections remain intact, particularly near the fortress of Euryalus on the far western edge of the defensive line. In Archimedes' era, these walls extended roughly 27 kilometers around the city. Syracuse also enjoyed significant natural defenses. Its main harbor could be blocked by heavy chains, making naval assaults nearly impossible. Surrounding mountains and cliffs offered further protection, leaving the city with very few land access points. When the Romans attacked in 213 BC, they launched a combined assault by land and sea. Pulcher targeted the northern walls where they met the shoreline, while Marcellus led his fleet of 60 Quincaraemes against the coastal defenses. Ancient accounts differ slightly on the exact location of this naval attack. Livy records it as occurring along the Acradina walls washed by the sea, whereas Plutarch provides no specific point. Polybius, however, is much clearer. He places the attack at the Stoicatus in Acradina, where the city wall descended directly into the water. Based on that description, the naval battle likely took place along a stretch of coast about 900 meters long. There, the cliffs of the Epipolae Plateau plunged sharply into the sea, the very site where Marcellus's fleet confronted the Syracusan defenses. Just west of that point lies the Porto Piccolo, a narrow inlet connecting Ortigia Island to the mainland. No rational Roman commander would have entered that harbor. Any vessels inside would have been trapped and attacked from three directions by Syracuse's defenders. The only viable strategy was to strike Acradina's outer seawall, along that confined rocky shoreline. When Marcellus advanced on Syracuse, his entire fleet consisted solely of Quincaraemes, 60 in all. To strengthen their formation, the Romans even lashed ships together, creating larger and more stable platforms that were less likely to capsize. Polybius, Livy, and Plutarch all agree on these details. With about 420 men per ship, the Romans commanded an estimated 25,000 troops at sea, including more than 7,000 marines prepared for deck combat. To put things in perspective, that loss represented nearly 1/4 of Rome's entire naval power at the time. According to Polybius, around 220 quinqueremes were active when the Second Punic War began. So what exactly was a quinquereme? Originally a Carthaginian creation, it became Rome's primary warship after the Romans captured one during the First Punic War and reproduced it plank by plank. The vessel measured roughly 35 to 37 meters in length and about 4 to 5 meters in width, with an additional meter added by the outrigger. Its displacement was around 75 tons when empty, and nearly 100 tons when fully manned with 420 crew members, including 270 rowers, 30 sailors, and 120 marines. The oar boxes running along both sides made it fast and streamlined in open seas, but also introduced weak points where grappling hooks could latch on, a flaw Archimedes would later take advantage of. Quinqueremes were designed for naval battles, not for sieges. Their bronze rams' long hulls and speed made them perfect for ramming enemy vessels. But when stationary under city walls, they became dangerously unstable platforms for attacks. To overcome this, the Romans used a boarding device called the corvus, a heavy plank with a spike at the end. When dropped onto an enemy ship, the spike locked both vessels together, creating a bridge for Roman marines to board and fight hand to hand. This approach suited the Romans well, as the Carthaginians excelled in maneuvering and ramming tactics. However, at Syracuse, Rome tried something new. To reach the city walls, 8 quinqueremes were tied together in pairs, each pair carrying a massive scaling ladder known as a sambuca. These floating siege towers transported Roman troops armed with ladders to climb over the defenses. Meanwhile, standard quinqueremes stayed behind, filled with archers and javelin throwers who provided covering fire. Polybius and Livy describe 4 pairs of ships, while Plutarch claims all 8 were joined into one massive raft, though this is less likely. Either way, the paired setup demonstrates how unstable a single quinquereme was for siege operations. Marcus Claudius Marcellus ordered 2 main assaults on the seawalls. The first, launched in daylight, was repelled by catapult fire before the ships could approach. The second attack, carried out at night, managed to avoid the catapults. The Romans had planned carefully, but Archimedes had planned better. His ingenious machines turned the city's walls into powerful weapons. Huge cranes dropped massive stones onto any ship within reach, while Greek crossbows and stone throwers tore into attackers before they could strike back. Even larger catapults launched projectiles hundreds of yards away, making it nearly impossible for the Roman fleet to stay within range safely. The fleet ran straight into Archimedes' defensive inventions. His iron hands, mechanical claws, grabbed the Roman ships while defenders hurled stones and lead projectiles onto the scaling ladders. Ancient accounts make it clear these claws didn't aim for the ladders themselves, but for the quinqueremes positioned behind them, firing arrows, slings, and javelins. Modern studies suggest that as many as 25 of these defensive machines lined the seawalls, each guarding its own stretch of water against Marcellus's 60 warships. Imagine being a Roman sailor under the moonlight, staring at the city walls, suddenly realizing the defenders weren't just men, but machines crafted by one of history's greatest minds. Ancient writers described them as iron hands and sometimes hooks, sometimes claws. The exact design remains uncertain today. Yet with surviving descriptions from Polybius, Livy, and Plutarch, supported by modern reconstructions, we can now form a vivid picture of how these devices worked and why they left. The Roman crews utterly terrified. Archimedes is believed to have designed the claw as a direct countermeasure to the advancing Roman forces during the Second Punic War, around 214 BC, when Rome laid siege to Syracuse by both land and sea. Ancient historians, notably Polybius and later Plutarch, recorded that this invention was not a single experimental model, but part of an organized system of defensive machines positioned along Syracuse's fortified harbor walls. This suggests that the claw was not merely theoretical, it was an operational component of the city's multi-layered defense system. Rather than one mechanical arm, it likely consisted of several crane-like structures placed at key points, where Roman ships were expected to approach. The so-called Claw of Archimedes was probably a complex network of cranes, pulleys, hooks, and counterweights, built directly into the city's harbor fortifications. Syracuse, located on the eastern coast of Sicily, had portions of its walls rising sharply from the sea, terrain that Archimedes cleverly exploited, turning elevation itself into a weapon. Imagine Roman warships, long, narrow, and powered by rows of oars, advancing to unload troops or attack the defenses. Normally, stone walls could only withstand attacks. They could not strike back. Archimedes changed that dynamic, effectively making the walls offensive weapons. Polybius, writing in the 2nd century BC, gives one of the earliest accounts of this device. He describes an iron hook, lowered by chain or rope which could grasp a ship's prow, lift it partially from the water and then release it suddenly, causing it to overturn or shatter. He further explains that Archimedes devised other machines capable of hurling heavy stones at Roman troops trying to land under protective covers, forcing them to retreat. Once a grappling hook had locked onto a ship's front, the lever system inside the walls would be activated. The operator would lift the prow, secure the machine's base, and then abruptly release the rope and pulley system, causing the vessel to topple sideways or capsize entirely. A century later, Livy offered a slightly different description. He imagined a more advanced mechanism, a crane-like beam with a claw or grapple balanced by counterweights, capable of lifting ships and smashing them onto the rocks below. According to Livy, when enemy ships approached too close for artillery to reach, the defenders used this swinging arm to latch onto the bow, raise the ship until its stern nearly stood upright, and then release it. Whether the ship landed upright or not, the impact would flood or destroy it almost instantly. Together, these accounts form a clear picture. The claw likely resembled a massive crane extending from the city walls with ropes or chains hanging down. At the end of these hung a forged iron hook designed to catch under a ship's prow or along its sides. Inside the walls, teams of operators managed capstans and winches to tighten the ropes. Even lifting the front of a ship by just a few feet could make it dangerously unstable. For the sailors, this meant chaos, sudden jerks, broken oars, and waves flooding the deck. When the defenders released the ropes, the ship slammed back into the sea, shattering its timbers and tossing men overboard. Some ships might even have capsized entirely. Plutarch, writing later, heightened the scene's intensity. He described entire ships being pulled upright, their bows pointing skyward before crashing down in destruction. Massive beams extended from the city walls over the Roman ships. Some vessels were seized by the bow with iron claws, lifted into the air until they stood on end and then dropped into the sea. Often onlookers would witness the horrifying sight of a ship being hoisted completely out of the water and spun around until its crew was thrown clear, leaving the empty hull to crash against the walls. The base of this device was likely anchored deep within the stone foundations of Syracuse's sea walls. Engineers would have set iron sockets and wooden beams into the masonry, distributing the immense load to prevent the crane arm from tearing free under strain. The main lever, estimated at 30 to 40 feet long, was probably made of layered timbers bound with iron straps for strength. At its far end hung a large iron hook, shaped like a grappling talon designed to dig into the hull of an enemy vessel. Chains or thick ropes coated with tar to resist seawater connected this hook to the pulley system. This blend of iron components, reinforced wood, and durable naval ropes made the claw both resilient and effective in battle. Archimedes' brilliance lay in his mastery of mechanical principles. By using pulleys and counterweights, he enabled a few men to control massive forces. A crane embedded in the city walls could exploit the height of Syracuse for leverage. Even if the claw didn't destroy every ship, it served as a powerful psychological weapon. Roman crews advanced in fear, never knowing which ship might be seized next. Ancient sources describe entire squadrons panicking as they watched ships lifted from the sea like playthings. The Romans had faced countless enemies before, but never had they seen the sea itself turn against them. Imagine rowing towards Syracuse's walls expecting stones or fire, the usual threats sailors were trained to endure. Instead, the ocean betrayed them as an unseen force wrenched their vessel skyward. They heard the creak of ropes, the groan of iron, and felt the deck tilt beneath their feet. The helplessness was overwhelming. No shield, no spear, no ram could stand against Archimedes' claw. Roman records describe sailors abandoning their oars or even jumping into the sea in panic, fearing being crushed inside their own ships. This fear alone weakened the morale of the Roman fleet, and gave Syracuse's defenders an almost mythical reputation. One major reason for the claw's success was the element of surprise. Unlike catapults or ballistae that were clearly visible on the city walls, Archimedes' claw stayed hidden until the moment it was used. A Roman trireme rowing confidently toward the harbor might not realize the danger until a massive iron claw suddenly emerged from behind a parapet, swung over the waves and locked onto its deck or prow. The psychological impact was tremendous. Roman sailors, already uneasy about facing a city defended by such a brilliant inventor, must have felt absolute terror as they watched one of their ships lifted out of the water like a child's toy. The structure of the claw can be divided into several main components. First was the foundation, likely a stone platform built into the city wall where the crane's base was secured. The crane itself was probably a tall wooden beam or mast, strengthened with iron fittings. At its top, a horizontal arm extended outward over the sea. Second came the pulley system. Ropes made from hemp or other strong fibers ran through pulleys that changed the direction of force. This setup allowed defenders standing safely on land to pull downward, while the hook outside moved upward. The system's core was a sophisticated pulley design, similar to what Archimedes described when he claimed he could move the earth with a lever. Sailors or soldiers would pull the ropes through multiple pulleys, multiplying their strength many times over. In this way, a dozen men could create the lifting power of hundreds. Counterweights, likely heavy stone blocks or filled containers, balanced the crane's arm, making it easier to raise or lower the claw with precision. By coordinating their pulls, the operators could swing the arm over the water, lower the hook, and then jerk it up suddenly to seize an enemy ship. Third was the hook or claw itself. Though its exact form is unknown, it was likely curved like a grappling hook, with one or more sharp prongs designed to latch onto a ship's planks or railings. It had to be strong enough to dig into wood without slipping. Finally came the release mechanism. Wooden warships of the Hellenistic period, such as triremes and quincurames, were not built to handle strong vertical forces. Their long, narrow hulls were meant for speed, not for lifting stress. When the claw gripped the side or deck beams, the sudden upward pull twisted the ship's frame. Even if the vessel didn't capsize, the torque could crack planks, snap oars, and throw the crew into panic. Being lifted even a few feet above the water was enough to unbalance sailors, often causing them to fall overboard before the ship crashed back into the sea with tremendous force. Once raised, the defenders could release the rope suddenly, letting the vessel drop back down with devastating impact. The release could have been as simple as loosening a rope from a capstan, or as advanced as using a trigger mechanism. While ancient sources like Polybius and later historians don't provide a detailed technical manual, they clearly describe the Romans' astonishment at this ingenious weapon. Some accounts suggest that Roman ships were suddenly lifted from the sea and smashed against nearby rocks. Others describe them being raised just enough to tilt, sending soldiers and weapons tumbling into the water before the vessel capsized. Whether these stories were exaggerated or not, they highlight the powerful impression Archimedes' claw left on ancient witnesses. To the Romans, it must have seemed less like a typical defensive weapon and more like a terrifying machine emerging from the walls of Syracuse. Modern experiments show this was not pure legend. In 2005, engineers collaborating on a television project built a full-scale replica of Archimedes' claw. They mounted it on a model city wall and tested it against wooden ships. The results were remarkable. The mechanism could grasp a ship, lift its front end, and make it rock violently. Although it didn't always overturn the ships completely, the force was enough to demonstrate how Roman vessels might have been disabled. These findings suggest that Archimedes' invention was both functional and realistic. It's important to remember that the claw was only one part of a larger defensive network. Archimedes also created catapults of varying sizes, giant crossbows, and possibly mirrors, though the so-called death ray of burning mirrors remains more myth than reality. The claw stood out because it transformed Syracuse's elevated position into a direct naval advantage. While most siege weapons launched projectiles, this device physically interacted with enemy ships at close range. It wasn't only destructive, it gave defenders control over the battlefield. The historian Polybius noted that some of Archimedes' machines could hurl stones with enough force to drive Roman soldiers off their decks before the hook was even lowered. This indicates the claw functioned as part of a coordinated defense, not as an isolated invention. From a strategic perspective, the claw suited Syracuse's situation perfectly. As a prosperous Greek colony dependent on maritime trade, protecting the harbor was essential. Archimedes knew he couldn't match Rome's fleet in size, but he could balance the odds by making every attack costly. Each damaged or sunk ship inflicted both moral and financial losses on the Romans. Moreover, because the device was most effective in the confined harbor, it forced the Roman navy to fight under unfavorable conditions. Historical records confirm that the siege of Syracuse lasted for years, with Roman commanders acknowledging Archimedes' machines as a major reason for their prolonged struggle. Still, the claw had its limitations. Each one could cover only a small portion of the harbor wall, requiring multiple installations for full protection. It also demanded precise timing. Operators had to catch a moving ship in rough waters, which required exceptional coordination and skill. In addition, maintaining ropes, pulleys, and metal parts in the salty Mediterranean air posed constant difficulties. These constraints explain why the claw served more effectively as a weapon of fear and deterrence than as a true fleet-destroying machine. It's important to recognize the limitations of the claw of Archimedes. This wasn't a weapon that could be easily mass-produced or used in every engagement. It demanded strong fortifications, precise positioning along the coast, and a skilled team familiar with Archimedes' intricate design. More critically, the claw could only strike ships that ventured close to the city walls. For targets farther away, Syracuse still depended on conventional defenses such as catapults and ballistae. This combination of long-range artillery and the claw's terrifying close-range power made Syracuse one of the most formidable cities to besiege. The device also showcased Archimedes' remarkable ability to merge scientific theory with practical engineering. His writings on levers, balance, and buoyancy came to life through this invention. When the crane lifted the front of an enemy ship, it applied leverage to destabilize it. As the vessel crashed back into the water, gravity and momentum amplified the destruction. It was a striking demonstration of physics turned into warfare. Ultimately, Syracuse did not fall to naval assault but to a land invasion in 212 BC. Amid the turmoil, Archimedes was killed despite Marcellus's explicit orders to spare him. His death marked the collapse of Syracuse's resistance, yet his inventions lived on in legend. The claw of Archimedes remains one of the most vivid examples of how innovation and engineering can shift the balance of power, even against mighty Rome. Though its exact workings remain uncertain, both ancient descriptions and modern reconstructions suggest it was far more than a myth. For a brief moment in time, Archimedes' brilliance shook the world's greatest navy. If you enjoyed exploring this fascinating piece of ancient warfare, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and share it with friends who love history as much as you do. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.